Get her off the stage. She's black. She's blind. She's going to ruin that Steinway. That was all it took. A cold, public insult from America's most celebrated piano legend, and the world nearly missed a miracle. Naomi Walker, the silent, invisible woman, stood alone beneath the lights of the majestic Harmonique Theater, offering neither reply nor resistance. She simply sat down beside the grand piano, and when her slender fingers met the keys, the entire hall fell silent. What followed was no longer just music. It was a revelation. This is the unforgettable story of a woman stripped of her sight, her fame, her place in the spotlight, yet who taught humanity how to truly listen with the heart. The Harmonique Theater, nestled in downtown Boston like an ancient gilded citadel, tonight gleamed beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers, the air thick with the scent of high-end perfumes and ambition. Along its red-carpeted steps paraded renowned artists, New England nobility, and powerful patrons, each footfall amplifying the authority of classical music in modern America. Tonight's dress rehearsal for the International Harmony Gala, hailed as the who's who roll call of the art world elite, ran like clockwork. But backstage, another world unfolded in hushed shadows. Naomi Walker, an African-American woman in her 30s, her curly hair neatly pinned back, dressed in a simple black gown, her dark glasses hiding eyes that had long since faded to darkness, felt her white cane tap lightly on the polished wood floor as she navigated each cautious step. No one noticed her. Or, more accurately, no one wanted to. In the chilling corridor, Naomi edged into a dim corner, her hands trembling as she clasped them together, fighting to keep her breath steady against the roar of music and applause spilling in from the stage. Fewer than 7 years ago, Naomi had been the pride of Atlanta's black arts community, a beloved piano instructor at Booker High School, whose every fingertip dance across the keys told the story of the struggles and joys of her South Side neighborhood, igniting hope in countless children who dared only to dream of playing a real piano. But one fateful night, on Interstate 85, in a brutal crash, she lost her vision, her career, her self-respect. Her husband left, friends drifted away, and society relegated her to an invisible shadow unworthy of notice. 7 years of navigating the world with a white cane, enduring hundreds of rejections and insults, had taught Naomi to bear every humiliation without complaint. Yet tonight, fate seemed to offer her a chance to touch the legendary Steinway at the very heart of the music world, only to have the stain of prejudice carve itself cruelly across her spirit once more. The auditorium's atmosphere snapped like a taut wire the moment a sharp, bitter voice cut through the distinguished audience. "Get her off the stage. She's black. She's blind. She's going to ruin the Steinway." Time froze. Naomi's legs quivered, not from stage fright, but from the unmistakable contempt that had been hurled at her. The man behind those words was none other than Nathaniel Royce, the white virtuoso who had reduced countless musicians to ashes with a single icy glance or arrogant smirk. Tonight, he stood in a bespoke black suit, silver hair gleaming under the lights, but to Naomi he embodied only one thing: the unyielding wall of power and prejudice she had yet to conquer. All eyes turned to Naomi, some curious, some ashamed, many outright gleeful. Among the hundreds of artists, sponsors, students, and managers, those who once praised artistic fairness, not one voice rose in her defense. A cold spotlight swept across her form, exposing her as a living testament to a mistake in the eyes of the so-called arbiters of taste. In that moment, every memory of humiliation, every fragment of shattered pride, surged anew within Naomi. She inhaled deeply, gripping her white cane, the only lifeline left to her dignity, and steeled herself to step forward, fully aware that ahead lay the abyss of merciless judgment. Naomi still stood there, seemingly motionless under the harsh spotlight, but in her mind, time reversed itself, sweeping her through layer after layer of memory back to a time long lost. What she saw was no longer the plush VIP seats of Boston, but the tiny sunlit window of Booker's School of the Arts in South Atlanta. Back then, Naomi Walker was the pride of her black community. A young woman with rich skin, bright eyes, and a determined smile, her long, graceful hands always dusted with chalk from the extra lessons she gave to underprivileged children. The school's piano was old, its keys yellowed and some stuck, but when Naomi played, that ragged instrument resurrected the entire neighborhood's carefree summers, filling the air with music and the promise of dreams kindled. She had been dubbed Booker's Light, an inspiration throughout the community. Her passion and talent earned her a Carnegie Scholarship and opportunities to perform in small venues from Georgia to North Carolina. Each piece she played was a testament to faith and the yearning of people deemed unworthy of the lofty world of classical music. Yet fate has its harshest tests. On a bitter winter evening, after teaching a community music class on Atlanta's west side, Naomi was driving home on Interstate 85 when destiny struck. A pickup truck swerved into her lane, colliding with her car in a screech of brakes and a flash of headlights. When she came to, everything was suffocating darkness. No shape, no color, no hope. Life after the accident became an endless abyss. Not only had she lost her sight, but the support of those closest to her vanished. Naomi's husband, a sound engineer who once vowed to stand by her for life, grew distant and quietly moved out, leaving behind only a note. "I can't bear to watch you like this." Friends in the industry drifted away too, whether unable to face her pain or unwilling to witness the downfall of someone who once shone so brightly. In the weeks that followed, Naomi had no place at Booker's School, and no one else would take her in, not even local rehabilitation centers. The only light in her world then was the echo of piano music drifting from an old radio, the one prized possession she still clung to from her days as a respected instructor. She embarked on a wandering journey across the South, white cane in hand and a small suitcase of sheet music at her side, seeking out schools, churches, even shelters. Anything that might let her teach or at least sit by a piano. But everywhere she went, she met skepticism, pity, or outright refusal. "I'm afraid it would be very difficult for our students to learn from someone who can't even see the keyboard. Sorry, we're not equipped to accommodate a visually impaired teacher." Those rejections repeated like dull blades, never sharp enough to cut deep at first, but enough to bleed her heart dry. During those days, Naomi learned to perceive the city through its sounds. The rush of traffic, the click of heels on the sidewalk, children shouting after school, rain drumming on rusted tin roofs. She trained herself to map the world by breath and breeze, by the faintest noises reaching her ears. With no images left, every memory had to be preserved in feeling and sound. At night, she'd curl up in a cheap boarding house room, fingertips tracing the surface of her suitcase, recalling every piano key, every musical phrase, every stretch of road she'd walked in a life now shrouded in endless darkness. Just when it seemed fate had slammed every door, Naomi learned of Boston's Second Chance for the Blind program, a small city initiative helping visually impaired people reintegrate through the arts. Barely daring to hope, she applied, expecting little. Yet, through sheer perseverance, she was accepted as an auditor at Eastbrook Conservatory, one of the Northeast's most prestigious music schools. That acceptance was a faint glimmer at the end of a long tunnel. Naomi recognized that this chance was less a gesture of genuine inclusion than a way for the school to bolster its diversity statistics. Still, to her, simply being near a piano, Hearing music fill the hallowed halls of a true conservatory was a rare miracle. She had no idea that Boston's chill would be nothing compared to the cold she'd find at Eastbrook. There, contempt came not just in words, but in looks, in closed doors, in class rosters where her name never appeared, in the silence of an institution used to a perfect, all-white order. And there, she would have to face her Nathaniel Royces, those impenetrable walls of elite prejudice who believed music belonged only to a select few chosen to wield it. Stepping onto the grounds of Eastbrook Conservatory, Naomi thought she had left Boston's wintry chill behind, but she quickly realized the real cold wasn't in the wind. It was in the gaze and the invisible walls that generations of prejudice had built around this esteemed music school. On her very first day, Naomi was escorted to the administrative office by an elderly social worker. Standing in the marble-floored lobby, where glittering lights played off portraits of distinguished white professors and artists, she heard the hurried footsteps and cheerful chatter of young students. They wore cashmere coats, carried Italian leather bags, clutched glossy sheet music, and moved with the confidence of people who believed every achievement in the world belonged to them. Naomi, with her white cane and scuffed suitcase, looked like an ink blot on that perfect canvas. The receptionist, after a brief, perfunctory exchange, handed her a thin packet of papers. Status: silent observer. Permission: not permitted in main classes. No instrument access. Practice hours: N.A. Naomi nodded, forcing down her disappointment, telling herself that even breathing Eastbrook's air was a stroke of luck. But the harsh truth revealed itself day by day. Naomi was barred from attending classes and relegated to the hallway outside Room 2B, where elite students gathered under Professor Harold McCain to study advanced harmonic structures and performance techniques. Students like Colton DeVero, the blond son of a state senator, always impeccably dressed and ever present at every extracurricular event, didn't hide their contempt. What is she, our new mascot? Maybe they'll let her tune pianos by feel. Their mocking laughter blended with the music, each snicker a blade to Naomi's dignity. And it didn't stop there. Sometimes Colton and his friends would accidentally leave the door ajar. When Naomi leaned in to listen, they'd slam it shut. "Sorry, this is a private session. Faculty only." Their words were never loud, but their bitterness lingered in Naomi's heart for hours. The dorm manager, Janice Kettering, put on a friendly face but concealed her bias beneath thin politeness. She would walk past Naomi's room, pausing to murmur just loudly enough for Naomi to hear, "Naomi, this is a prestigious institution. Don't make anyone uncomfortable. Some donors are very sensitive about appearances." Every one of her comments felt like a warning sign. "You're an outsider. Don't mess with our order." Once a beloved teacher admired by students and parents alike, Naomi now clung to the hallway walls like a silent shadow. She learned music not with her sight, but through the supercharged memory and hearing of someone who'd once known light and lost it. She listened as the piano's notes threaded through that heavy door, identifying each chord, each grace note, each page turn on the lectern. Some days she sat for hours, waiting to recognize the sound of Harold McCain's footsteps slowing at the podium, the chalk tapping against the board, cues that had become the soundtrack of her memory. After class, as students filed out, Naomi would quietly follow their breathing patterns, deducing who felt downcast, who had just been praised, who was leaving with a heavy heart over poor marks. It was unjust, humiliating, but strangely, it was in Eastbrook's darkness that Naomi began to relearn everything. She memorized room acoustics by the echo of her footsteps. She learned the rhythm of knocking. She distinguished people by their vocal timbre. She mastered reading music without seeing the score, simply by feeling it. At night, she traced imaginary staves on the edge of her suitcase, silently practicing chords in her mind, fully aware she might never press real keys again. Yet, even in what seemed a realm of pure darkness, Naomi held on to a faint spark, the desire to be heard just once. And that longing only grew stronger under the weight of barriers and the cruelty of people like Colton and Janice. Eastbrook was the bastion of well-connected pedigrees, where every step, every piece, every nameplate was predetermined for those meant to be here. And still, Naomi, their unwelcome silhouette, stood firm in the corridor, the only place she was allowed to truly listen to the world she had once yearned to touch. And so, day after day, Naomi still sat outside room 2B, silently absorbing every sound coming through that thick wooden door. Whenever Colton and his friends laughed after class, or Janice swept past with a cold, disapproving glance, Naomi would shrink further into the stream of hurried students, doing her best to become invisible. But that night, a torrential downpour washed the campus clean, stripping away the veneer of prestige that Eastbrook used to mask its injustices. In the deserted hallway, under the flickering fluorescent lights, Naomi sat against the wall, head bowed, hands gently clasped as if cradling an imaginary piano. No actual music played, yet in that darkness the piano still resonated in Naomi's mind. Keys without form, carried only by emotion, and the sound born from the deepest loneliness of someone who had lost everything. At that moment, footsteps echoed down the hall, slow, deliberate, and weighted with a peculiar gravity. Naomi realized immediately. This was neither Colton's arrogant stride nor Janice's hurried pace, but someone accustomed to moving slowly, listening to each echo on the marble floor. The footsteps paused beside her. Naomi didn't look up, but she felt the presence of an older man. A long silence followed, long enough to hear raindrops pounding the distant window and the newcomer's soft breath. "What did you play today?" he asked, his voice warm and low, with a slight rasp like a well-worn cello. Naomi startled, pressing her lips together and bowing her head even lower, fingers twisting nervously. She said nothing, afraid of being scolded or looked down upon again, or perhaps simply because she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone genuinely ask after her. The man didn't prod further. He sat on the step beside her, close enough to break the usual distance people kept from her. Outside, the rain fell harder, streetlights casting muted beams across the cold stone as the two of them sat side by side, bound together by the hush. Only when Naomi carefully lifted her head, her dark glasses brushing his sleeve, did she hear him speak again, softly, yet as if cutting through all the walls she'd built around herself. "Don't apologize. Play it true." Naomi froze. For years, she'd only ever heard things like, "Please don't bother us. This isn't for you," or worse, whispers that never even used her name. But this wasn't pity or empty encouragement. It was a command, a gift that restored Naomi to her rightful self. Playing music isn't about saying sorry, hiding, or earning pity. It's about being true to yourself. In that instant, the rain, the lights, even the distant hum of Boston receded. Naomi lifted her hand and let her fingers play a familiar melody in the air, keys imagined, but the emotion achingly real. The silver-haired man listened without comment, offering no explanation, simply allowing that invisible music to fill the hall. Time stood still, and for the first time in years, Naomi felt she was not alone. It was Professor Harold McCain, a veteran concert pianist renowned in halls across America, who had chosen to teach harmony 2B so he could share the deepest truths of music. Harold had seen in Naomi what Colton's, Janice's, and even Eastbrook's powerful faculty council couldn't. A talent obscured by darkness. A spirit that refused to die despite living in silence and pain. And from that moment, no pledges or ceremonies were needed. Between these two strangers, a silent bond took shape. Something no one at Eastbrook or anywhere in Boston could have foreseen. A quiet journey from darkness to light, between an old teacher and a student cast aside by the world, in search of music's true essence amid the harshest prejudices. Since that fateful rainy night, Naomi Walker embarked on a new chapter of her life, one in which darkness was no longer an abyss of despair, but the secret backdrop for the rarest light of all, authentic music and the soul's harmony between two solitary hearts. If Eastbrook was a maze of laughter, prejudice, barred doors, and scrutinizing stares, then the old storage room beneath the basement was the only place Naomi found a measure of freedom. It was a narrow space with damp, whitewashed walls and a single flickering fluorescent tube. The scent of aged sheet music mingled with rotting wood. On dusty shelves sat thick volumes stained and chewed by mice. Against one wall stood a worn Baldwin upright piano, its keys dulled and misaligned, its wood scarred by decades of neglect. But to Naomi it was a gift, especially given how accustomed she'd grown to living off everyone else's discards. Harold would come only after dusk, when the click of heels and cheerful chatter outside had faded into silence. He arrived like the last keeper of a tradition increasingly diluted by commerce, vanity, and the pressure to conform. No curriculum, no fresh sheet music, just him and Naomi, facing that battered piano like co-conspirators in a secret ritual. He never began with dry theory. Each lesson was a story. Some nights he'd recount his youth playing in Harlem nightclubs, hair just speckled with gray back then, trading jazz ballads for pocket change yet carrying the fever of that reckless era. Other nights he'd sit in silence, tapping a steady rhythm on the piano's rim to evoke a lullaby his mother sang years ago. Sounds no textbook could capture, yet ones that resonated in his memory for a lifetime. In his calm, resonant baritone, he'd say, "D minor isn't always sad, Naomi. It's the shadow cast when the light fades. Grief doesn't have to sob aloud. It can settle softly, like darkness soothing weary eyes." Naomi learned music by touch, the one sense she still possessed after the accident. Her hands would rest on the worn wood, feeling every faint vibration whenever Harold pressed a key. When he spoke of the wind's voice through the window, she closed her eyes, not out of necessity but to immerse herself in every ambient tremor. The wind whispering through a crack, rain pattering on the tin roof behind them, distant footsteps on the corridor floor, Harold's gentle breath as he summoned memories. She absorbed it all through resonance. Once, to teach her the difference between C major and A minor, Harold placed her palm against the piano's side, letting her feel the wood's differing vibrations and harmonics rather than pointing out the keys. There were no notation exercises, no mechanical drills. Each session was an expedition through feeling and recollection. "Naomi," Harold would say, "when you can't see, listen with your whole heart. Music needs no justification beyond itself." Naomi had once been a model teacher, instructing underprivileged Atlanta students in theory and technique. But at Eastbrook, she was finally living music in its purest form, untethered from grades, expectations, or comparisons. Harold assigned her unconventional homework. Tonight, transcribe the rain into notes. Tomorrow, feel your heartbeat as you remember your mother. Listen to the piano and imagine it as the voice of your dearest loved one. Late at night in her drafty boarding room, with only moonlight slipping through aged curtains, she practiced these tasks. She wove broken memories, pain, hope, failure, gratitude, into melodies that lived purely in her mind. Harold was more than a teacher. He was the only one who looked at Naomi with genuine respect. He offered no pity but held deep admiration for her gift to hear, feel, and recreate music. Often, in a hushed tone, he'd tell her, "Only those who've lost everything can truly listen to the world's depths. You are a real musician, Naomi, because you don't play to show off, you play to save yourself." But Eastbrook watched every deviation from its standards. One evening, as Harold and Naomi lingered after a late practice, the hallway lights flared on to reveal Janice Kettering, arms crossed and scowling. "Professor McCain, remember you must register after-hours rehearsals with the office. And Naomi, I trust you understand your place here." Janice's icy gaze was a suspended sentence. Even miracles have limits, and kindness demands vigilance from the powerful. It wasn't just Janice. Students like Colton DeVaro whispered during breaks, "Have you heard how odd McCain's been? Teaching that blind girl in the basement? Unbelievable." Colton, Eastbrook's pride and star pupil, began to feel threatened, not by Naomi's ability to surpass him, but by her quiet presence, which reminded him and his peers of the values they'd long forgotten. They left snide, faux sympathetic comments. Maybe one day the board will give her a showcase, just to prove Eastbrook isn't ableist. Even some faculty muttered that Harold was wasting talent on a charitable fantasy, and some secretly sent letters to the dean demanding he stop his unorthodox project. Those walls of suspicion, envy, and prejudice thickened daily, yet they only bound Harold and Naomi more tightly in their shared secret. One chilly evening, Harold told Naomi of an old musician's solitude, once celebrated by thousands, only to be cast aside by a single misguided critique. He laid a trembling hand on her shoulder. "We truly live only when we dare to play our own music, regardless of what the world thinks." That night, for the first time in years, Naomi returned to her room without tears. She smiled softly instead, feeling her heartbeat, its rhythm intertwined with music's vibrations and the genuine empathy no one, neither Colton nor Janice, could ever take away. Those winter nights when Naomi left the cramped storage room piano, her heart warmed a little by Harold's unseen lessons. A new undercurrent was stirring at Eastbrook. In this closed-off world, nothing stayed secret for long. Though Harold and Naomi kept their late-night sessions hidden, rumors seeped through the corridors on students' whispered voices, eventually reaching the ears of the most powerful faculty. Naomi's presence at Eastbrook had always felt like an anomaly to many, but when a celebrated instructor, one who once won the Pan American Harmony Award and was hailed as the conservatory's living treasure, took her under his wing, the grudging tolerance beneath the surface ignited into a covert blaze of prejudice. The faculty lounge grew heavier than usual. Department meetings buzzed with hushed gossip, and skeptical glances aimed at Harold spoke louder than words. One longtime colleague, Professor Anderson, feigned friendliness but couldn't conceal his sarcasm. "Looks like you found your new muse down in the basement, Harold. Too bad Eastbrook is for genuine talent, not a charity case." Others said nothing, but a single arched eyebrow or subtle frown was enough to isolate Harold in their minds. Meanwhile, Naomi felt a chill that went beyond winter air, a chill from the walls built by people. Students began avoiding her. As Naomi walked the halls, she caught snippets behind her back. "There she goes, sneaking down to the basement again. Heard Professor McCain's trying some miracle cure down there, like on a TV drama." Their pity and contempt showed clearly in their eyes. If once Naomi had been an invisible shadow, now she was labeled a troublemaker. the blot on Eastbrook's perfect picture. Classroom doors would click shut as she approached. On days she longed to eavesdrop on a piece in room 2B, Colton DeVaro would slam the door in her face, the lock's harsh click snuffing out any hope. Worse, students who'd remained silent now actively made her life difficult. They would accidentally leave backpacks, suitcases, or other obstacles in her path, forcing Naomi to stumble, then act oblivious as she picked herself up. Once, Colton bumped into her in the hallway, sneering as he muttered, "Sorry, I forgot you can't see where you're going." His friends erupted in laughter. Naomi bit back her words, gripping her white cane, knowing any protest would only deepen her isolation. Pressure didn't come only from students. Clarence Langford, chair of piano, embodied Eastbrook's old guard, staunchly formal, viewing tradition's purity as the sole shield of the conservatory's reputation. A former protege of Nathaniel Royce, he measured everything by pedigree and strict adherence to the status quo. One afternoon, Harold was summoned to Langford's office, a grand, austere room scented with polished wood and lined with portraits of renowned, white artists, their pride unassailable. Langford wasted no time. "Harold, I've heard about your after-hours lessons with Miss Walker. Eastbrook isn't a laboratory for pity experiments. Step out of line, and there will be consequences. Don't forget, this institution survives by preserving its standards. We're not here to flaunt charity." Harold said little, offering only a gentle smile and an unshakable calm. He knew painfully well that Eastbrook had never truly opened its doors to anyone different, but he also knew that one retreat now would spell Naomi's and his own final defeat. Langford pressed on. "I've received feedback from the board. Major donors don't want any unsuitable images at our events, especially with the Harmony Gala approaching. Harold, choose wisely." Afterward, Harold quietly found Naomi in the old storage room. He didn't recount every threatening word. Instead, he said, "Naomi, sometimes to protect the smallest spark of light, you must walk through layers of darkness." For Naomi, each day at Eastbrook became a battle between her urge to be heard and the raw exclusion pressing in on her. Yet, in that frozen landscape, she honed ears sharper than ever, a memory more extraordinary than steel, and an inner world more resilient than any prejudice. Every night Naomi returned to her tiny boarding house room, thin blanket, frosted window, street lamp glow slipping through the curtains. She no longer cried. Her tears had run dry during her wanderings from Atlanta to Boston. Instead, she practiced music in her mind, replaying melodies purely by imagination. Some nights, she could even recall Colton's hurried footsteps on the stairs and deduce his mood from the uneven rhythm. Remember the click of a classroom door, the slam of a latch, the rustle of sheet music, the exasperated sigh of a fellow student whose practice fell short. Soon, Naomi began composing her own pieces, music forged from pain and hope, memories of her mother, childhood, and the underprivileged students in Atlanta who had celebrated their first notes with her. Music became her sole sanctuary, her last fortress against isolation and judgment. While Colton, Langford, and their ilk saw Naomi as a stain on Eastbrook's air, she, their target, transformed hurt into strength, silence into song, and darkness into the deepest listening any of them would ever know. Late at night in the Eastbrook basement, if someone paused long enough, they might hear a faint piano echo, imperfect, unassuming, yet profoundly heartfelt, like a soul's sigh in the storm. And within those notes, Naomi rewrote her own fate. Amid the many unshakable walls of prejudice at Eastbrook, Only music and quiet perseverance kept a tiny flame of hope alive in Naomi Walker. But no barrier, however solid, no slammed door, however heavy, can hold forever. One day, fate comes knocking, offering a chance to those who don't belong, whether it's a test or a bitter trap. Harold McCain knew Naomi couldn't remain on the sidelines. One late night, when the east wind howled against the basement window and rain drummed steadily on the tiled roof, he quietly fetched an old tape recorder and asked Naomi to improvise a short passage on the spot. No notice, no selection, no famous title, just honest, fractured music pulsing with feeling. He carefully labeled it, Naomi Walker, 34. Music is her first language. No photo, no glittering resume, no letters from the powerful, just a single audio file sent to the Showcase Young Virtuoso Committee, known for its strict standards and scarce attention to outsiders. Yet, sometimes even fate rewards courage. After weeks of silence, a letter arrived in the conservatory's central mailbox. Naomi was invited to audition at 7:45 a.m. Saturday in Practice Room 4, a small, chilly space with only a battered upright piano, no celebrity judges, no microphones, no audience, no spotlight, just a lonely clock on the wall and an air of indifference. Even the setup made clear this was not a real opportunity but a courtesy audition, a token nod to someone deemed unqualified, meant to be dismissed afterward. On audition morning, Boston lay under dense fog. Naomi walked to Eastbrook with Harold, her thin coat barely guarding against the biting cold. They passed empty corridors lit only by solitary yellow bulbs and echoed by their footsteps, reminders that she was still uninvited. At the audition door, Harold paused and laid a gentle hand on her shoulder, passing her a warmth after months in darkness. This isn't for them to choose you. It's for you to decide if you need them. His eyes held no expectation, only the sincerity of someone who understood that music's greatest gift is given first to the player's own heart. Inside, they found a low-ceilinged room with thick walls blocking every outside sound. A middle-aged man sat behind a small desk, gray sweater, no name tag, glasses perched on his nose, bored, as though merely doing a job, not awaiting anything extraordinary. Naomi sat down at the upright piano, chipped paint, yellowed keys, a long crack in the lid. She removed her gloves and let her fingers brush the dust. A fine layer of neglect, the dust of forgotten winters and dashed hopes. She said nothing, offered no explanation, not even a sigh. She began with the opening measures of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a piece only the truly bold dared attempt, not for technical showmanship, but for the emotional depth that demands excavating every pain buried in memory. Though she couldn't see the keys, her hands knew each position perfectly, recreating her own history across the piano's dusty face. The first notes rose, simple but potent, trembling yet fierce, like a call from the depths of a soul beaten down time and again yet rising on its own strength. Each note Naomi played was more than sound. It was her story. Tears, those disoriented months, memories of her mother, the ache of the world turning its back, and the fragile hope that one day her music might be heard for what it was, not judged by skin or disability. The cold room seemed to draw her breath into the music. From start to finish, she relied solely on memory and will. No sheet music, no guidance, only the accumulation of years of silent practice. When the final chord faded, not grandiose, not timid, Naomi lifted her hands and exhaled, sitting quietly for a few extra seconds. She didn't expect applause, nor sought a nod of approval. The lone judge looked up, offered a curt nod, jotted something on his notepad, and said nothing. No good job, no encouragement, no questions. He rose, gathered his papers, and gestured next, as if her effort had been no more than another rote moment in the audition schedule. The door shut behind Naomi, the click of the lock sharply sealing away every last hope. In the hallway, Harold waited, his aged eyes unable to hide both heartbreak and helplessness. Though he was no stranger to setbacks, he still ached for his pupil. Naomi said nothing. She only nodded and managed a small, dignified smile, the kind of smile of someone who has crossed a bottomless chasm but kept her self-respect intact. Outside, Boston's sky was ash gray, raindrops tracing streaks down the audition room window, like the silent lament of all those who came before, longing for recognition but met only with silence. The villains, Langford, Colton, Janice, were absent from that audition. Their absence, however, was the loudest presence of all. The system had prepared its trap so that Naomi's defeat would go unnoticed and unregretted. Yet Naomi, carrying all her shame and solitude, continued forward, because she understood that music sometimes only needs to be played once in a lifetime to speak an entire human story. After that frigid audition, Naomi Walker returned to her boarding room, her heart cracking once more, under the weight of disappointment and loneliness. A few days later, she found an email, just 2 lines, from the Showcase Young Virtuoso Committee. "We appreciate your effort. Unfortunately, you are not on the official performance list this year." No explanation, no feedback, no second chance. The door she thought had opened slammed shut without a trace. Naomi sat motionless at her desk for what felt like hours, the only sound the steady patter of rain against her window. She didn't cry or complain. Her tears had long since run dry. She assumed this failure, too, would fade into oblivion like all the others in the life of an invisible person. Yet fate often begins with the smallest, most overlooked details, just like Naomi herself, and like the janitor, Richard Grant. Richard Grant was a thin, stooped black man in his 50s who pushed his cleaning cart through Eastbrook's halls every day, dusting the bronze statues of long-forgotten founders. Students had mocked him. Once, Colton DeVero even cursed him in front of his friends for accidentally spilling a bucket of water near the recital hall. But Richard endured in silence, because he knew that some people are only permitted to exist as shadows, and yet those very people see the true nature behind all the glittering facades. On the morning of Naomi's audition, Richard happened to arrive early to clean practice room 4. As Naomi struck the final notes of the prelude in G minor, he stood quietly outside the door, listening, his chest tightening with emotion. He didn't grasp every academic nuance, but he heard something far more vital: truth, pain, resilience, and a dignity pressed down for far too long. Without a second thought, Richard pulled out his old phone and recorded the last 3 minutes. No zoom, no angled shots, just the pure moment of a blind black woman pouring her soul into the piano. Then he quietly uploaded the clip to the old Pianists Union, a small forum where hundreds of aging, anonymous pianists still preserved their music and their old dreams. At first, the video drew only a handful of views and a few heartfelt comments from strangers without avatars. But then, something extraordinary happened. Marcos Viala, the world-renowned Argentine pianist who plays with one hand after an accident, stumbled upon it. He shared the clip on his personal feed, captioned in English and Spanish. "I cried. I haven't cried for music in 10 years. This is not a performance, it is life itself." The ripple became a wave. Soon, Yuki Sakamoto, a famous deaf pianist in Japan who feels music through floor vibrations, retweeted it. "She doesn't need to see the keys to touch my soul. I don't need to hear the notes clearly to feel her heart speaking through her hands. In just 3 days, what began as a post on a tiny forum exploded into a phenomenon. No PR team, no clickbait, no sensational backstory, just raw truth, tears, and an elemental human emotion that anyone could recognize as the voice of a soul the world had cast aside. Hundreds, then thousands, then millions watched, not for entertainment but as a collective awakening to the real power of music and humanity. Comments flooded in, "Who is this woman? How could Eastbrook let her slip away? This is the most real music I've ever heard. She's blind, she's black, and she just demolished every wall I thought existed between music and the soul." The media pounced. Naomi Walker, the blind black woman who played from her soul, became a hot topic on art forums from Berlin and Paris to New York. Journalists, bloggers, even skeptical conductors couldn't look away. Many articles demanded answers from Eastbrook's administration. Why would a world-class conservatory reject such authenticity? Does Eastbrook have an issue with diversity and genuine talent? A backlash erupted online. Hashtags like "Let Naomi Play," "Real Music Matters," and "Blind but Brilliant" trended, along with calls for Eastbrook to explain itself and give Naomi a second chance. Alumni, veteran faculty, and even some minor donors publicly rallied behind her, defending truth and artistic fairness. Inside Eastbrook's corridors, the air felt frozen. Young teachers exchanged uneasy glances. Students who once mocked Naomi now fell silent, unable to meet Harold's or Richard's eyes. Colton DeVero feigned indifference, but every awkward glance in the dining hall and every disparaging comment on social media reminded him that his reputation was crumbling. Chairman Langford convened an emergency meeting. Slamming his hand on the table, he barked to the council. "This is just an online fad. A black blind amateur, no proper technique. The media is overhyping this nonsense." But the international press wouldn't relent. A New York Times reporter caught up with Harold McCain, and Harold simply said, "Some people listen with their ears, some with their heart. Naomi listens and plays with everything she has left." Naomi remained in Boston, curled up in her little room, never appearing in the press or replying to any emails. All she knew was that an unexpected wave was rising outside, something she had never dared to imagine. Beyond her window, Boston trembled with an unforeseen musical earthquake. And for the first time in her life, Naomi's name was spoken not as a victim or a problem case, but as someone who reignited the purest faith in the power of art to move people and to banish loneliness. Amid the countless walls of prejudice that had never wavered at Eastbrook, only music and silent determination kept a fragile spark of hope alive for Naomi Walker. Yet, no matter how stone-like people's hearts grew, and no matter how many doors slammed shut, there comes a moment when fate knocks, offering even the outsiders a chance, whether it's a test or a bitter trap. Harold McCain understood that Naomi couldn't remain forever on the sidelines. One late night, when the east wind howled outside the basement window and rain tapped steadily on the tiled roof, he quietly fetched an old tape recorder and asked Naomi to play an impromptu passage. No warning, no repertoire choice, no famous composer, just her heart laid bare in sound. He labeled it simply, "Naomi Walker, 34. Music is her first language." No photo, no resume glimmering with awards, no letters from the powerful, just that single audio file sent to the Showcase Young Virtuoso Committee, known for its rigid standards and rare invitations to outsiders. And then, as if fate itself recognized courage, a reply arrived. Naomi was invited to audition at 7:45 a.m. on Saturday in Practice Room 4, a small, cold space with only a battered upright piano. No celebrity judges, no microphones, no audience, no spotlight. Only a lonely clock on the wall and an air of polite indifference. The layout made it clear. This was no genuine opportunity but a token gesture, a courtesy audition for someone deemed unqualified, destined to be brushed aside. On audition morning, Boston lay cloaked in thick fog. Naomi walked to Eastbrook with Harold, her thin coat barely staving off the sharp chill. They passed darkened corridors lit by a single yellow bulb, hip-deep in echoes of their own footsteps, reminders that she was still uninvited. At the door, Harold placed a warm hand on her shoulder. "This isn't for them to choose you. It's for you to decide if you need them." His gaze held no judgments, only the conviction of someone who knows that the truest music lives first in the player's own heart. Inside, a gray-sweatered man sat behind a plain desk, no name tag, bored expression, mere functionary, not expecting anything remarkable. Naomi took her seat at the upright, chipped paint, yellowed keys, a crack in the lid. She removed her gloves and let her fingertips brush the thin layer of dust of forgotten winters, of hopes prematurely buried. She offered no fanfare, no explanation, not even a breathy prelude. She began with the opening measures of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a piece so deep in emotion that only the boldest risk it, not for technical bravura, but for its demand to unearth every buried sorrow. Though blind, her hands knew each key's place, mapping her own history across the piano's worn face. The notes rose, simple, urgent, raw, like a soul's cry from the depths, trembling yet unbreakable. Each chord spoke of tears, of her lost sense of direction, of memories of her mother, of the world's harsh betrayal, and of that fragile hope that one day her music would be heard not by prejudice but by truth. In that chill room, her breath merged with each resonant tone. From first note to last, she relied solely on memory and will. No sheet music, no prompting, only years of silent practice. When the final chord faded, not grandiose, not timid, Naomi lifted her hands and exhaled, pausing in a hush. She did not wait for applause, nor for approval. The lone judge simply nodded once, jotted a note, and motioned "next," as though her entire life had been no more than another box to check. The door clicked shut. Outside, Harold waited, his aged eyes brimming with both heartbreak and helpless pride. Naomi gave a small, dignified smile, the smile of someone who had crossed a bottomless chasm yet kept her self-respect intact. Boston's sky was slate gray, raindrops tracing trails down the audition room window. Echoes of countless others who had sat hoping for recognition, only to meet silence. And though the villains, Langford, Colton, Janice, were absent that morning, their absence spoke volumes. The very system had laid its trap, ensuring Naomi's quiet defeat would pass unnoticed. Yet Naomi, bearing her shame and solitude, pressed onward, because she understood that sometimes music only needs to be played once in a lifetime to tell a lifetime's story. The backstage door of Crescendo Hall closed behind Naomi Walker as softly as a breath, propelling her into a moment of destiny. Her heart no longer fluttered with fear, but with a sacred thrill. A soul, after years of torment and darkness, finally free to step into the light. Without a chaperone, without permission. There was no entourage, no stylist, no manufactured aura. Naomi emerged quietly, her slender frame clad in a simple black dress, barefoot so she could feel every grain of the stage's wooden floor. In her hand, she carried only an old wooden flute, the sole keepsake from her mother, her companion through so many lonely years. On that stage, there was no MC, no introductions, no background music, and no dazzling lights. There was only the soft tap of her white cane against the floor, echoing into the vast silence of an audience of more than 3,000, and the millions more watching via international broadcast. Naomi did not bow or speak. She set her flute aside and reached instead for the Steinway & Sons D274, once considered off-limits by Royce and the elite, now gleaming with her reflection. A woman without sight, yet radiating a profound serenity. The hall was utterly still. No coughs, no rustles. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the pivotal moment. Naomi placed her hands on the keys. No sheet music, no rehearsal, no allegiance to convention. She began to play an entirely new improvisation, a piece never written down, never heard before, never even imagined for a stage like this. The first note rose, sustained like a lone breath of a child lost in a crowded market, fragile yet razor-sharp. The melody unfolded slowly. Each chord sounded like a sob, sometimes shattering, then flowing seamlessly, reviving itself in a cycle that echoed Naomi's own journey, crushed, forgotten, but unbroken, alive, wounded yet achingly beautiful. In the audience, ambassadors, renowned artists, benefactors, the world's musical power brokers, barriers and defenses began to fall away. No one could hold back tears when they realized this was no mere performance, but a silent, anguished cry for all those pushed to society's margins, who knocked and found no one to open the door, who raised their voices only to be unheard. Naomi did not play to flaunt technique, nor to prove she had overcome adversity. Her music spoke as the confession of millions rejected, teachers dismissed for disabilities, children of color in struggling neighborhoods sneered at, invisible women behind shop windows, voiceless souls across America and beyond. With each aching chord, Naomi revisited old wounds, yet she no longer feared the pain. She poured every experience into the music, from the light of childhood to the abyss of loss. Her fingers trembled over the keys, not from fear, but from the weight of emotion, the longing to give voice to a generation told they did not belong here. Behind the curtain, Nathaniel Royce watched, stunned, his own hands shaking for the first time in his life. He had always believed that technique, fame, and legacy were enough to rule music's throne. But in Naomi's shattering notes, he heard what he'd lost: truth, unfiltered emotion, the very purpose of art, and a reminder of the young man he once was before glory blinded him. Royce glanced at his own hands and remembered how, once, he had played to save himself from loneliness, not to command admiration. In Naomi's music he heard transformation, agony, and a stern reminder: I once played to live, not to lord over others. In the audience, Gerard Monroe, the art director, nodded silently. He understood that this moment would go down in history. Outside, millions watching live on television shared the feed, commented, and wept in silence. For the first time, people with visual impairments around the world felt music touch them without seeing anything but its heartbeat. Those who had faced discrimination and prejudice felt represented, heard, seen on the planet's grandest stage. When Naomi finished, she did not end on a thunderous chord or orchestrate a grand finale. She left only one final rest, a pause longer than any heartbeat, then gently stood, laying her hand on the piano's edge in quiet farewell to an old friend. She bowed not to the audience but to the pain that had made her unbreakable. No one in the hall rushed to applaud, because sometimes the deepest tribute to a transcendent melody is silence. Behind the curtain, Royce closed his eyes as tears brimmed on his once steel face. He knew. In this instant, His throne had been shaken, not by technique, but by truth. Outside, the echo of Naomi's music still lingered. She remained the woman without light, but for the first time in Crescendo Hall's history, the world understood that the greatest illumination springs from the very depths of darkness. When the final notes dissolved into silence, Naomi Walker's song did not conclude with a decisive chord, but with a sustained stillness, as if the silence itself sighed, touching the deepest recesses of every soul in Crescendo Hall that night. From high above, the house lights quietly withdrew instead of shining down, yielding to a gentle pool of light that cradled the figure of the black woman. Her sightless eyes, her long, curly hair still flecked with sweat and tears from her journey through darkness. At first, the audience remained motionless. The hush stretched on, not from hesitation but from the collective awe of a crowd that had witnessed something beyond the ordinary bounds of art. Then one person stood, then another, until the entire hall rose to their feet. There were no raucous ovations, no cheers as at a famed concert. They simply stood, turning toward Naomi Walker in a silent apology. Sorry to all who had once denied her, who had turned their backs and slammed shut every door, not only against her but against countless generations of the unseen. In the back row, Nathaniel Royce stood unmoving. His eyes were rimmed red, his arms hung limp, and his silver hair no longer glinted with the smug confidence of old. For the first time, he understood. Stains of shame and words of insult may endure, but there are also moments of music, true transcendence, powerful enough to force every monument and every prejudice to bow before the truth. The MC stepped forward to introduce the next act, but nobody listened. Camera lights swung to Naomi, revealing her laying the wooden flute gently back on the piano, offering a soft smile to the crowd, then turning away. Barefoot, she traced the worn stage floor as though bidding farewell to her own pain. No bouquets, no oversized checks, no sponsor handshakes, no million-dollar record deals awaited her. When the gala assistant extended a microphone, Naomi merely bowed her head and whispered, almost to herself, "Sometimes the truest music is heard in silence." Without waiting for a closing cue or final applause, she departed the greatest stage of her life, leaving behind not regret, but a silent tremor that stirred every heart. As Naomi's form vanished, the giant screens replayed tearful faces and clasped hands, even among those who had mocked, disbelieved, or turned away. For them, this was a wordless atonement. The moment they realized that music and truth cannot be subdued, no matter how many walls of prejudice surround them. Backstage, Nathaniel Royce sank to his knees, unable to face his own performance. That night, for the first time in 40 years, he refused to go on, leaving an empty stage, a toppled icon that the music world would remember for years to come. His door of glory slammed shut even as outdated values were crushed, making way for a new truth. Only those who listen with their whole heart truly deserve music. The next morning, Naomi rose early. She and Harold quietly boarded the first bus out of New York, disappearing from prying lenses, interview requests, and million-dollar record offers. Boston, her old home, was no longer a place to return. All she left behind was a media frenzy like never before, thousands of emails, hundreds of calls from journalists, top-rated talk shows, offers to serve as an artistic ambassador and teach masterclasses across Europe, the Americas, and Africa. Yet not one message received a reply. On morning newscasts from Paris and London to Tokyo and Johannesburg, commentators hailed Naomi as the voice of the new century, an icon of freedom and truth. Hashtags, Naomi Walker and Listen with Your Soul, trended worldwide. Yet she, the woman who made millions of hearts pause and listen to themselves, vanished like a wisp of mist, leaving behind those brilliant stage lights without a trace of fanfare, recognition, or regret. Some say Naomi refused it all, fearing that glory would taint the purity of the music she offered the world. Others believe she understood that only by preserving silence, by rejecting power, could her freedom be truly eternal. And so a new chapter began, the journey of an artist who chose freedom, freedom from every label, every pressure to become a hero, keeping for herself the deepest light of all, the music of the heart. Leaving behind the spotlight in the big city, Naomi and Harold relocated to Salzburg, Austria, a town nestled among snowy mountain peaks, where the wind sighs through pine trees and distant church bells ring like ancient melodies. They rented a small wooden cottage on the forest's edge and lived in solitude, far from prying eyes. No reporter ever discovered Naomi's true address. No television crew ever caught sight of her. They say that each morning, Naomi walked barefoot across the dew-kissed grass, sat by the window to listen to birdsong and the breeze, and quietly played musical fragments that she never repeated. There was no Steinway piano, only an old upright, and sometimes the wooden flute her mother had left her. Occasionally, Harold would brew tea, and the two would sit in silence, the only sound the rustle of parchment as Naomi wrote. Yet, in a remarkable twist, Naomi's name never truly vanished. As though by a silent enchantment, her music began to spread worldwide, not through albums or concerts, but via carefully handwritten scores on brown parchment, ink warm like an old breath, always unsigned and without a return address. At the bottom of each manuscript, in italic braille, appeared a single line. Listen with the place where language has been forgotten. No one knows where these compositions first appeared. One day, at a pediatric cancer ward in New Jersey, a grieving mother received an anonymous envelope containing the piece, "The Breath You Left Behind." When a doctor played it on the piano for the young patients, its gentle, halting melody moved her to tears, not from sorrow, but because she felt her son's presence lingering in every breath. In a Georgia state prison, a man serving 17 years received a score titled "The Wall Remembers," marked by long pauses and irregular rhythms, like knuckles tapping on a cell wall at midnight. When he performed it on the plastic table in his cell, memories of his mother's piano flooded back, and he wept, not in anger, but in relief that someone had finally heard him. At a school for deaf children in Osaka, the piece, "For Those Who Were Never Chosen But Dared to Raise Their Voices," was taught by having students feel the vibrations on tabletops. Those children, who once believed they had no right to touch a piano, found the courage to try to step beyond their fear of ridicule. These scores are not easy. They defy conventional harmony and rhythm, brimming with rests and empty spaces annotated only with "listen with your breath," "touch with your own pain." Yet, strangely, everyone who's ever placed a finger on those notes feels part of their soul set free. In Brazilian orphanages, children practice "No One Knows My Name, But I Am Still Here" on pianos with worn keys, their small fingers fumbling. In a Paris suburb nursing home, a grandmother with fading memory suddenly sang an old tune when a caregiver played an untitled score, as if someone she once was had returned. There are no album releases, no copyrights. These scores are copied, photographed, passed hand to hand, spreading like an immortal whisper of the forgotten. One winter afternoon in a small Nordic town, a wandering musician found a sheet on a park bench, took it home, and when he played it, burst into tears because he heard my childhood calling back out of the silence. In Africa, an orphan boy who first heard Naomi's music on a broken phone learned to play it on pebbles in the dirt, became a street musician, and used its melody to buy his sister her first meal. Occasionally, the press speculates Naomi has appeared in Nairobi's volunteer music classes, a tiny mountain church in the Andes, or a field hospital in Syria. But no one captures a photo or confirms her presence. All that's known is that, like a breeze, she leaves behind new compositions and new hearts. Once convinced they were unworthy of music, now daring to sing. Each manuscript bears only that familiar Braille line, no signature, no hint of its author. Yet paradoxically, that very anonymity has carried Naomi's legacy farther than any grand anthem of so-called stars. The grieving mother, the lonely prisoner, the deaf child, the forgetful grandmother, the failed musician, they all meet in one place. Music not to differentiate rank, not to adorn glory, but so that every person, however humble, may know they have existed. No one knows where Naomi is today, but whenever someone dares to listen fully to that place where language has been forgotten, it means she still lives, still writes, still sows songs for the nameless, a legacy that needs no applause and no name. And back in Boston, Royce, once atop the pinnacle of power, has begun practicing again on his old piano. He plays Naomi's found scores from the internet, learning to listen with his heart, learning to cry like a child, uttering his first apology. Each night he traces that embossed Braille line, whispering, "Listen with the place where language has been forgotten." And he knows, from now on he will never dare to live as he did before. The echoes of those unsigned, unknown compositions, the handwritten letters without signatures, and the embossed words, "Listen with the place where language has been forgotten," spread far and wide, weaving a quiet legend. The art world looked on in astonishment. Within a single year, hundreds of these strange, nameless scores had transformed lives in the most hidden corners, in circumstances once deemed utterly hopeless. The following spring, the Royal Council of Arts in London, the oldest and most prestigious arts body in the world, announced with surprise, this year's Artisan Prize goes to Naomi Walker, the first recipient with no conservatory diploma, no famous recordings, no official published work, and whose real-life appearance remains unknown. Reason: she changed the way the world hears itself. The international media was stunned. Never before had a blind black woman living in seclusion, without ties to any illustrious musical dynasty, been honored with an award often compared to a Nobel Prize for music. Critics scoffed. Old guard commentators sneered. But thousands of young artists who had received Naomi's handwritten scores, countless vulnerable souls who knew loneliness, quietly smiled, knowing this was a historic moment. On award night, Royal Hall brimmed with guests from over 90 nations. Journalists queued for blocks. Camera crews bristled with anticipation, and the world's eyes were fixed on the ceremony. But when Naomi appeared, all expectations of a grand legend vanished. She wore a dark linen cloak, barefoot, without makeup, without escort, without herald, carrying only her mother's weathered wooden flute and her white cane. She lowered her head and walked slowly across the stage, her face radiating a serene calm, as if she had come not to receive glory, but to settle a debt with the world. The organizers presented her with a handcrafted crystal trophy set on a century-old oak base, a prize every genius dreams of. Naomi gently placed her hand on the statuette, tracing its contours, then bowed, not toward the judges, not toward the distinguished audience, but toward the vaulted ceiling of the hall, where she imagined her mother, orphaned children, and abandoned souls listening. She spoke no words, shed no tears, lingered no longer on stage. Instead, Naomi opened her old cloth case, drew her wooden flute, and played a very brief melody, a nameless phrase, free of technical display, like a quiet summons to every heart. She laid the trophy back on its pedestal, claiming nothing for herself, bowed once more, and departed. In that instant, the entire auditorium, from silver-haired maestros to bright-eyed students, from music industry CEOs to the stagehands, remained hushed. No applause, no cheers, because everyone understood nothing honors music more than truly listening. That very night, the Royal Council of Arts convened an emergency session. After hours of deliberation, they issued a historic declaration. From this year forward, the Artisan Prize will be renamed the Naomi Walker Honor, not merely to celebrate one individual, but to remind artists everywhere, music is the path back to ourselves, not a conquest of others. The announcement splashed across headlines the next morning, sending shockwaves through the art world and touching hearts everywhere. In Boston, Royce watched the ceremony in silence, tears falling as his fingers traced cold piano keys. In that moment he realized his throne, his illusions of grandeur, all shrank before the humility and truth of a soul who truly listens. On art forums around the globe, thousands who received Naomi's handwritten scores shared one refrain: "I came back to life, dared to dream again, all because of a nameless melody." In Osaka, deaf children relearned that flute tune by feeling its vibrations. In a Georgia prison, inmates tapped its rhythm on tables. Grieving mothers placed hands over their hearts as the melody played, each believing that from now on, art truly belongs to those who listen. No one asks where Naomi is anymore, because everyone understands. When you have the courage to listen to your own heart, you will always find her, in the silence between the notes of life. The Royal Council of Art's decision to rename its top prize the Naomi Walker honor sent shockwaves through the art world. In the United States, public outcry grew louder by the day. Newspapers, human rights organizations, and young artists all demanded that prestigious conservatories like Eastbrook completely overhaul their admissions and teaching practices, not merely to make amends to Naomi, but to atone for the years the musical establishment turned a deaf ear to those who belonged nowhere. Eastbrook's administration could no longer ignore the momentum. After thousands of petition signatures and the threat of funding withdrawals from major sponsors, the school convened a public forum and approved a bold proposal: establish Bellwing, a brand new music campus where everyone has not only the right to play, but the right to be heard, regardless of background, skin color, ability, gender, or wealth. Bellwing's grounds opened without grand gates, red carpets, statues, or trophy rooms filled with past heroes. Instead, its corridors contain abundant natural light. Classrooms are multisensory, with stepping floors for the deaf, sound-responsive walls for the visually impaired, and quiet nooks where students may simply sit and listen, to the wind, to the rain, to one another's breathing. Even the entrance exam defied classical convention. It tested the ability to listen to oneself and others rather than sight-reading Beethoven. Applicants were asked, "Tell me the very first sound you can remember. Compose a melody using only footsteps. Write a passage using string vibrations alone. No keys required." In every classroom, you will find no photographs, statues, or honor rolls bearing Naomi Walker's name. At Bellwing, no one is ever called legend, and no one holds permanent center stage. Only a single white stone marker stands in the central courtyard, where sunlight pours through the trees, etched in Braille and English. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is where everything waits to be heard. Naomi did not return for Bellwing's dedication ceremony. No speech, no social media post, no message of congratulations. Yet, throughout that day, countless people who had received her handwritten scores, who she had quietly helped over the years, felt as though her music still flows through every pause in the air. Harold, the old teacher whose hair was now snowy white, was invited to speak. He stood before the stone marker and said simply, "I once met a young woman sitting in a hallway, learning music not by sight, but by the touch of her fingertips on cold wood, learning not to perform for an audience but to save herself. Bellwing will be the place where every child who was ever told, 'Music is not for you,' is free to find their first note, even if no one else can hear it." Old adversaries were present that day too, not as defeated foes, but as witnesses to an era now past. Clarence Langford, the dean who once tried to expel Naomi, stood in silence, his head bowed as he read the inscription on the stone, reminded of the limits of power. In a farther corner, Nathaniel Royce appeared, no longer wearing his dark glasses, mingling among Bellwing's young students, tears in his eyes as his trembling hand grazed the marker's surface, perhaps craving, for once, presence without praise. Beyond Bellwing's gates, the ripple effect spread across America and the globe. Conservatories introduced listening literacy courses. Classrooms began with 5 minutes of silence, so every student could share their own inner sound. In orphanages, prisons, hospitals, deaf and blind communities, Naomi's nameless scores were passed hand to hand, translated and played anew, becoming the soundtrack to healing and advocacy. Though Naomi remained unseen, she became the invisible spirit behind every reform, every unsigned score, every listen before you play lesson carried her essence like a gentle breeze that cannot be restrained, yet can never be erased. The media had once clamored for Naomi's return, banner headlines claiming she must accept her honors and become the face of progress. But she needed none of that. At Bellwing, it only takes one person brave enough to listen to their own heart and dare to play that first note to ensure Naomi Walker's legacy lives on forever. Since Bellwing's founding, Naomi Walker's name has seemed to dissolve into the wind, vanishing from every newspaper headline, every Hall of Fame list, every grand and humble stage. No one, even the most dogged reporters, could trace the woman who once hushed the world with a single, wordless melody. Yet strangely, Naomi's invisibility only deepened and amplified her presence and legacy. Not through media clamor, but through quiet ripples that reached every listening heart. In a dusty Texas farmhouse, a black boy dared for the first time to touch the old wooden piano in his school simply because his teacher said, "You don't need to be anyone special. Just have the courage to play that first note." In a Nairobi classroom, children heard of the blind woman who'd never set foot in Kenya, yet whose music taught them to hear their own heartbeats and weave a first chorus out of laughter, rustling leaves, and flowing water. In a Kyoto Children's Hospital, a copied, hand-scrawled score soothed young cancer patients, rubbing teacups, tapping window frames, transforming everyday sounds into songs of hope. On a Paris train platform, a street musician lifted Naomi's nameless tune to his flute, and 100 passers-by fell silent, then laughed or wept for reasons they could not name. In Ghana's fishing villages, drumming troops passed along the Iana Pulse, a rhythm learned not from notation but by listening to the silences between beats, echoing the stories Naomi had sown in her music. In Bhutan, a sheet of anonymous score paper hung on a small temple door, and locals whispered, "If you hear anything in the stillness, it is where Naomi once walked." In Canada, an Inuit music teacher reproduced her for those who were never chosen, and encouraged students to write the very first sound they wish to give back to the world. More and more, people who had met Naomi in spirit, though never in person, emerged everywhere. Prisoners drumming scores on plastic tables, grieving mothers replaying "The Breath You Left Behind" at memorials, deaf children learning vibration-based melodies, and failed musicians who thought they'd never find their voice. In a single, ordinary moment, they all felt touched not by a distant legend, but by someone who had faced darkness and was never afraid of it. Teachers worldwide adopted Naomi's words as their new motto: "You just need the courage to play the first note when everyone is waiting for you to fail." Conservatories, large and small, began retooling curricula. Instead of opening with Chopin or Beethoven, they first asked students to listen to their own inner sound before learning any instrument. At Bellwing, in the very first weeks, students walked barefoot, listening to each other's footfalls, feeling each breath and gust of wind, the creak of wood, then composed their own first pieces. These works might be rough, incomplete, but they carried the quiet bravery Naomi Walker had sown in the world. Nathaniel Royce, the man who once coldly rejected Naomi, now lives a quiet life in Boston. No longer headlining grand stages, he teaches students who haven't had a chance: immigrant children, seniors with dementia, those once deemed unable to learn music. Royce tells them of the blind woman who saved him from his own pride, advising, "If you listen deeply enough, you will find her in every note you play, even if no one applauds." As for Naomi, she never asked to become a legend. For the rest of her days, she yearned only for this simple truth: that every person, no matter who they are, where they live, or what they've endured, knows they are no longer invisible. So that when the stage lights dim and fame fades away, there will still be wordless melodies echoing in the silence, reminding the world of life's true worth, of listening, of courage, and of the bravery to speak one's own truth amidst the vast quiet. Naomi Walker taught the world an eternal lesson. True music does not spring from grand stages, nor exist to conquer or to dazzle, but begins in the smallest moment, when someone dares to sound a note in the silence and invites others to finally listen to themselves. If Naomi Walker's journey has moved you, please hit like, share this video with friends, and subscribe so you won't miss more stories that inspire, touch the heart, and stir the soul. Because sometimes the greatest music starts in the very silence you dare to hear.